All right. Hey, everybody. It looks like some folks are already getting started in the chat. Um, John D., why do you prefer the New Oxford Annotated Study Bibles to SBLs? SBLs is new. At the moment, I would say I prefer it to the 5th edition to the New Oxford Annotated Bible because it, one, incorporates the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version. And I think a lot of the sidebars are very helpful. I think I will prefer the 6th edition of the New Oxford Annotated Bible when it comes out because it will have a lot of thematic essays in the back, and I've really enjoyed those. I think they do a phenomenal job of giving a deeper dive into some of these issues that we don't get a lot of discussion about. So, but I think they're neck and neck. So. James Apperson, hey Dan, recently Dr. Jennifer Bird agreed with my assessment that Bible writers were men with major personality disorders, writing how-to guides for getting away with it. Your thoughts? I wouldn't disagree with that. There's a standard deviation in what the authors were trying to do, but we interviewed Dr. Bird for the Data Over Dogma podcast, so that show will be out within the next couple of weeks. So if you want more of an hour-long discussion between me and her, you'll want to check that out. All right. Hi, everybody. Brady, good to see you. Precious Hand of Omega, thank you for being here. Oblates or oblates of Lectio Divina, does the data support the idea of Jesus as a loving, peaceful, progressive? In some places, absolutely. However, he was kind of a radical for his day. And if you just tried to transplant him to today, he would not be all that progressive, although loving and peaceful. I think the majority of the time he would be. And so that's doing counterfactual history, though. So if you took Jesus before he became the Jesus that we know from his ministry, or that we have reconstructed from his ministry, and you transplanted him to today and allowed him to grow up, and then he decided to go into some kind of public ministry, I think he would probably have become fairly progressive. But again, that's counterfactual history. But for his day, he was a radical. And most of the rhetoric has him as loving and peaceful. Where's a good resource to look into the origins of the word marriage in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin? There's not really a word in the Hebrew Bible for marriage. You have one that develops long after, but I don't know of a resource that goes through the etymological development of those words in those languages off the top of my head. However, speaking of Dr. Jennifer Bird, she was on the podcast to talk about her book, Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? So I think this is a wonderful book. And one of the things it discusses is the fact that there is no actual word that means to marry or marriage or anything like that in the Bible. Dan, have you ever read Proving History by Dr. Richard Carrier? Bits and pieces of it, but I couldn't get into it too much. Me gustó tu video en español, gracias. Voy a tratar de hacer más de esos videos, pero tengo que practicar mucho más. Was their crime the burial of the dawn goddess? I don't know what crime you're referring to, but burial of the dawn goddess. I don't know if you're talking about Merlin's book, When God Was a Woman, or if you're talking about some other theory. But I don't think that the narrative of primarily matriarchal religion being taken over by a patriarchal approach to religion. I don't think it's nearly so clean. I don't think that trajectory makes good sense of the data. Um, but maybe you can, if there's something specific you're referencing. I don't think I know what it is. Hello, Roman Vasquez. Is the SBL Study Bible good for learning about the biblical narratives critically? I would say so. It is kind of intended for a devotional audience, but it does take a largely critical approach. So yeah, I think so. Um, LDEM, thank you so much for the super chat question. I've been reading God's Monsters, so about the cherubim. The book says they were gatekeepers between human/divine spaces and are shown facing both, keeping people out of the divine and the divine in place. Thoughts? Yeah, you see it. You see cherubim flanking thrones as kind of guardians of the person sitting on the throne. You see the Lamasu are guarding the gates to a city. The Ark of the Covenant has the cherubim guarding it, and also kind of functioning as the guardians of the throne, because Adonai dwells. And there's actually not a preposition there in the Hebrew. It's like dwells of the cherubim. So it could be between, it could be upon, depending on how you interpret it. So yeah, I think that is an accurate representation. They're primarily there to kind of guard the liminal spaces, and that's why you have a cherub. Cherub is it's singular, isn't it? In the Garden of Eden, or does it say cherubim? It might say cherubim now that I think about it. Yeah, cherubim. Cherubim. Yeah, so that's guarding that liminal space between the higher authority and the lower, between the divine and the profane. Craig, good to see you. Is the comment in Luke 20 meant to be a universal negation of the possibility of marriage in the resurrection? You got to give verse numbers so I can pull these things up. But yeah, the idea is that, so at the time, the notion of angelic sex was controversial because of the Enochic literature, because of the Enochic renegotiation of the story that we have in Genesis 6:2-4, with the B'nai Elohim, the children of God, siring offspring with the daughters of humanity. And so there were debates, and we see this in, for instance, let me see if I can pull it up. There's a wonderful paper. It's difficult to access. So Alexander, and why am I blanking? Philip Alexander, whom I met while I was in Oxford, but he published this paper, 50 years ago now, 52 years ago. The Targumim and Early Exegesis of Sons of God in Genesis 6. And this is in Journal of Jewish Studies. One of the things he talks about in here is how the idea of angelic/human sex was controversial. And so some Targumic and rabbinic authors were like, no, the angels just appeared while humans were having sex, or the angels transformed so that they could engage in intercourse. And there were debates about whether there was genetic compatibility and all that kind of stuff. And this is where we get the rise of the reading of the angels as humans, because like angels couldn't be disobedient, so it can't be angels, or the angels are not sexually compatible, so it's got to be humans. So that was controversial at the time, and so the idea of marriage in heaven, where the angels are, was also considered a bit of a no-no. And you also have a kind of ascetic, celibate stream of tradition within early Christianity that's reflected in places like Matthew 19, and probably here as well. The idea is that everyone will be ace in heaven, because sex is part of the baser urges of the corrupt flesh and are not meant for the eternities. So I think that's probably the position. But let me just pull up, scroll through Luke 20 to see if I can find the exact verse. Yeah, that's the the whole levirate marriage thing. Do where he says, "For they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God," or B'nai Elohim in Hebrew, just like Genesis 6, being the children of the resurrection. So, uh, they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. In other words, sex is not for the eternities. It is only for this base, corrupt, mortal world. Thank you for the kind words, by the way, everybody who is just popping in to say they appreciate my work. It means a lot. I appreciate it. What are your thoughts on Richard Carrier's work? Most of his theories are pretty fringe, and he does an awful lot of very pejorative stuff, particularly on his blog. It's difficult to slog through a Richard Carrier blog post, and he's made some very disparaging personal remarks about friends of mine. But yeah, he's representative of a very very fringe approach to the historical Jesus that really only has legs because a lot of people on the internet who are not scholars are attracted to it because of rhetorical reasons. All right, I'm going to try and stay a little more up with the comments tonight, which means I'm going to be scrolling past an awful lot. So I apologize that I'm going to probably be answering fewer questions. Well, yeah, a smaller percentage of the questions, but I'm going to try to stay caught up so people don't post questions and then have to wait for 45 minutes to see me answer them. Thomas Ashton, thank you so much for, I believe that's what's called a super sticker or something like that. Was Shachar the name for a dawn goddess? So in the Ugaritic literature, we have El, who meets some maidens on the beach and engages in intercourse with them, and they give birth to the gracious gods of dawn and dusk, and so they are deities there. Now in Isaiah, we have this phrase "Halel ben Shachar," which means shining one, son of Shachar, which is the dawn. So that is probably a deity of some kind. How it was personified according to the biblical authors is anyone's guess. We don't have a ton of good ideas, but trying to link it with like later Indo-European ideas of dawn goddesses and things like that, I don't think is going to be successful. But yeah, it's definitely a deity of some kind. Eunice and Cleon, thanks for standing up for LGBT people. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Uh, I don't feel like I'm doing nearly enough, but there is a lot of work left to do. But I will continue to do what I can within the bounds of the boundaries that guardrails I've set for my channel. Is Yehuda a Yahwistic theophoric name? No. It is, oh gosh, I'm for some reason blanking on that. So there is no one in all of the book of Genesis who has a Yahwistic theophoric name. The very first Yahwistic theophoric name might be Yochebed, which was Moses' mom in Exodus, but might not be. Yeah, Yehuda means praise. Or let me see if it breaks down any better than that. I am, yeah, thanksgiving or praise, the noun form of the root yada. So toda would be thanks. So yeah, no, Judah is not based on the Tetragrammaton. How accurate do you think is Inspiring Philosophy's YouTube videos? I mean, as far as apologists go, I think they're better educated than many, but I also think that the scope of their exposure to the scholarship is pretty limited, and they are willing to engage in some, I would argue, fallacious reasoning. And I've got to respond to there's a like a 40-minute video about why Luke's account of the census is probably historical, and that's filled with logical problems and also problems with the evidence. So yeah, it's still an apologetic channel, and as such is trying to perform credible scholarship to an audience that cannot distinguish credible scholarship from non-credible scholarship. And so the goal is not really to engage in credible scholarship so much as to try to convince other people that they're doing credible scholarship. Hi, Dan. I've searched about Spanish Bibles for a while. It appears what the best translation and edition with critical notes is the Cantera Iglesias Bible from Spain. It was recently updated. Well, I'll have to check it out. I have not heard of that translation. Let me give it a. All right. Ooh, excuse me. It was just updated, huh? All right. Well, I will take a look. So it looks like it came out in 1975. It must be. I will take a look at that. Thank you. I don't want to get too caught up right now, though. Hi, Dr. McClellan. Hey, JA. Side question. If you have the time, I'm finishing my master's and trying to decide if I want to apply to a doctoral program. I wonder if you have any thoughts on your experience. I had a very non-traditional doctoral experience. I was accepted to go back to Oxford for they call the PhD the DPhil over there, and then they did not give me any funding. This was in 2010, I think, and we were in the recession, and they weren't offering a lot of funding. And I got close to a couple of other programs, but didn't get accepted to any other doctoral programs. I think I probably applied to PhDs 4 times, like 4 cycles, and I actually got accepted to go to a PhD at Claremont right out of my bachelor's. But I deferred to go do the master's at Oxford, and then when I wanted to go back and take up my position there, they were like, "Oh, turns out we're restructuring our whole program, so find something else to do." So I didn't have a great experience applying for doctoral programs, and then I just had a full-time job, built this house, and was like, all right, I guess I'm not doing academic stuff anymore. And then it was because of a friend of mine named Francesca Stavrokopoulou, who was the chair of theology and religion at the University of Exeter at the time, said, hey, we have a distance program, you wouldn't have to do coursework, it's just the PhD. I think I'm fascinated by your research. I think you'd be a perfect fit. You just need to find a way to pay for it. And I was fortunate enough to be able to find a way to pay for it. So I started up. I got my second master's degree, which is right here, from Trinity Western University. I think it arrived at my doorstep December 31st, 2013. I started my PhD in September of 2015. So for a couple of years, I was not in the academy. So I had a very non-traditional graduate experience. So I wouldn't take my experience as representative. There are a lot of people who have a great time. There are a lot of people who have an awful time. I think probably half, if not more, of my undergraduate cohort that graduated from BYU with me in Ancient Near Eastern Studies are not in academics anymore. The field is getting smaller, so I guess I would share the the recommendation that was given to me my very first day as an undergrad. There are no jobs. Get out of this field unless you cannot imagine yourself doing anything else. And if you cannot imagine yourself doing anything else, then go ahead and do it. But be aware that It's not a growing field. So I loved it so much. I was not going to get out of it, but like my career would be considered a failure by the traditional standards. Like I have never had a full-time position, a tenure track position. I've adjunct taught, like I think the majority of people with PhDs in my field are doing right now. And I've applied to a bunch of positions and never got close to getting any of them because there are fewer and fewer every year, and there continue to be more and more PhDs. However, the industry is probably shifting as well. So I think there are going to be a lot more people who are doing what I do in the future. So if you want to sit in your pajamas and wear comic book t-shirts and argue about the Bible on the internet, and hopefully be able to do that for a living, and you can't imagine yourself doing anything else, then keep on keeping on. But yeah, do it with your eyes open. And some people want to do it just because they want the experience, they want the degree, and they want to have accomplished something like that. And if that's what you're doing, then by all means. I had a wonderful experience. Sorry, I'm taking too long with questions, huh? Have you seen Dr. Christine Hayes' Yale lectures on the Bible? I'm aware of them. I've watched a few minutes of them. I have not sat down to watch the whole thing. And her comments on the meta divine realm. I don't think I'm aware of precisely what her position on the meta divine realm is, though. Shalom, Jason. Saw your video about your ride. I'm jealous. Looks like you had a great time. At some point, I've got to get down there and ride motorcycles with you. Is Hosea 1:7 prove Jesus is God? No, Jesus would not exist until many centuries after Hosea 1:7 was written. But what do we got there? The house of Israel will have mercy on, and I will save them by Adonai their God. Yeah, this is the idea that you see third person address all the time in the prophetic literature. This is not a big deal. This is not indicative of some additional person of the Godhead or of the Trinity. This is just the way prophets write. And you can look at any commentary on Hosea for exactly what's going on there. It's not like they're just the notion that this is some kind of second consubstantial person of the single being of God would have been absolutely laughable to anyone living in that time period. But let me see if I can. I don't want to take too much time, but let me just look real quick at what kind of comments. Yeah, this is going to take too long to find something. Where are the missing books of the Bible? They were probably destroyed millennia ago. And we have a lot of pseudepigraphical and apocryphal and other texts, and you can find them in a bunch of different places. James Charlesworth published a 2-volume apocrypha and pseudepigrapha set where each volume is like 3 inches thick, and that's a wonderful place to go for that. For the New Testament, you can go look at there's one volume called the New Testament, which takes some New Testament pseudepigrapha and apocrypha and incorporates it in. You also have I think it's called the Other Gospels. Yeah, Bart Ehrman and Zlatko Pleshi. I'm sure I pronounced that last name wrong. The Other Gospels, accounts of Jesus from outside the New Testament, that has translations of 39 different non-canonical New Testament texts. So the Nag Hammadi codices, you can see translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are a lot of things that you could refer to as missing books, but there are texts that are like in the Hebrew Bible. It's like, and is this not written in the annals of the kings or something like that? The wars of the kings and those things, they probably stopped existing 2,600 years ago. You've said before that your personal religious beliefs don't affect your scholarship. What would you say to other Christians who'd contend dispute that? Find something better to do. Um, on the Resurrection by Dale Habermas or Dale Allison's Resurrection? Allison's is a far more measured approach. Have you looked into Kabbalah and their view/perception of the Bible? It's not a specialization of mine. I'm aware of it. I've read some stuff on it, but certainly not a specialization. Could you explain El Shaddai? Was this a separate deity to Adonai? And if so, how did they merge? Um, So the combination El Shaddai is probably a later one, but Shaddai is probably a reference to a separate deity. We have in Deuteronomy 32:17 this reference to Shedim, which is probably etymologically related. It talks about other. It says they worship Shedim and not God, other gods they did not know. And so that's probably a reference to Shadain. Well, the Aramaic way to write it would be Shadain, but some other kind of class of deity. And we have the Deir Allah inscription, which is kind of an Aramaic-ish inscription from around 800 BCE, and it talks about a class of deities called the Shadain. And so Shaddai is probably some kind of title that comes from that other class of deity. El Shaddai, there's an argument that Shaddai means breasts, God of breasts. You have in Genesis 49, I want to say it's either verse 25 or 26, where it talks about Shaddai will bless you with the blessings of the womb and the blessing of the breasts. There are connections there conceptually. Other people would say Shaddai means wilderness, God of the wilderness. Hang on just a second. Probably the best discussion is Ted Lewis's book, The Origin and Character of God, Ancient Israelite Religion Through the Lens of Deity. It is over 1,000 pages, but you do have a bit of discussion about the different El deities, El Olam, El Brit, El Shaddai, and the others. And yeah, you got 9 pages, 101 to 109 on El Shaddai. Let me just yeah, El Shaddai. El Shaddai is the god of the mountain. El Shaddai is the god of the steplands. El Shaddai is the destroyer. El Shaddai, early or late. So yeah, a lot of discussion in there on El Shaddai. So I would highly recommend this. And this is an expensive book. It's $100, but as far as academic books go, there are an awful lot of books that are not 1,100 pages that cost a lot more than $100. So I recommend that book. What's the podcast topic this week? Tomorrow, it will be the first segment is on Jesus cursing the fig tree. We're going to walk through that whole story. This segment's the chapter and verse segment, and then the second segment we're talking about Deutero-Isaiah. We're going to talk about where that comes from, the rationalizations for it, and get it a little bit into some of the apologetic responses and the rationales of apologists. So that's coming out tomorrow. So yeah, look for that wherever fine podcasts are given away for free. Any book recommends on Christian history? I'm actually listening to Dermot McCullough's book, History of Christianity, the First 3,000 Years, which has been pretty thorough and pretty good so far. Like a lot of it is just kind of dancing along the surface of the scholarship. And so there's some outdated and I would say incorrect things in there based on just kind of a cursory glance at what the scholarship is saying without getting deep into it. But that covers a lot of ground. That's an interesting one. There are a ton of histories of Christianity. I don't know that any of them really blow my hair back. Here's one. Marcus Vincent, writing the history of early Christianity from reception to retrospection. That's going to have a lot to do with what others have said about Christian history. A new history of early Christianity by Freeman. That is from 2009. Charles Freeman. It's a Yale University Press book. Yeah, there are all kinds of books on the history of Christianity. Can you talk about Jesus's brothers? The texts refer frequently to Jesus's family, and James was one of his brothers and probably took over as the leader of Christianity. He's in Jerusalem after Jesus's death, and then he was killed. And Josephus refers to the killing of James. How does this square with the idea of Mary as a perpetual virgin? It doesn't. The idea of Mary as a perpetual virgin was a later doctrinal development that kind of became necessary based on the way they were developing their thinking about the birth of Jesus. And so there are no data that point in that direction. They got to the point where they're like, well, if we accept all this stuff, then Mary has to have been perpetually a virgin. And they said, okay, well, then we're going to say that. Daniel de la Noche. Bienvenido. I hear you use the word Deuteronomistic sometimes. Can you briefly explain your usage of this word for those who aren't familiar with it? Yes, just a moment, though. Okay, so according to the standard theory of Pentateuchal composition, we have two main sources: the priestly source P and the Deuteronomic source D, or Deuteronomy. And scholars, as they were putting this together, noticed that the Deuteronomic source, Deuteronomy, had a lot of close ties to a lot of what was going on in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And so you went from the Pentateuch to an Enneateuch that included a bunch of additional books. And so you have the Deuteronomic source, or Deuteronomy, and then you have the Deuteronomistic texts, which are the later texts that are being written by folks who are supporting Deuteronomy, who are writing based on Deuteronomy. And so I think the Deuteronomistic history would be those layers of the texts after the Pentateuch that are being written by the school responsible for Deuteronomy as it developed over the centuries. Thomas Romer's book, The So-Called Deuteronomistic History, is probably the most thorough yet mostly accessible discussion of this, a sociological, historical, and literary introduction. So that's, and I think this is from 2010. No, 2005. Oh, I was way off. Yeah, it wouldn't be 2010 because I got it in Oxford, and that was 2009. So yeah, Deuteronomistic history would be this is one of the kind of literary layers of the bringing together of the Hebrew Bible, expanding beyond the Pentateuch. So some scholars will say Deuteronomy or the Deuteronomic source would be the part of the Pentateuch, and the Deuteronomistic would be the later stuff. I royally screwed that all up. Humpback DeLorean, thoughts on double/dual fulfillment of prophecy? The overwhelming majority of the time, it's just a rationalization. Sure, some of them probably had such an idea or wrote vaguely so that their prophecy could have application to a lot of different circumstances, but most of the time it's just a rationalization. Could El Shaddai be derived from Ninhursag? That would be an interesting argument. I don't. Sounds like a bit of a stretch to me, but I would have to see an argument. Seth Harrell, thank you so much for the question. Can't help but notice the comic posters behind you. Have you ever read Mark Said and Alex Ross' Kingdom Come? Oh, I have a copy of somewhere. It might have vanished long ago, but I had a copy. I used to love Alex Ross. one of my favorite painters of comics, but been a long time. Hey Dan, what is your next book about, and when is it coming out? May of 2025. My book will be coming out, and it will basically be talking about what the Bible does and doesn't have to say about a lot of topics that are part of the public discourse. So, does the Bible say that abortion is murder? Does the Bible warn us about suffering eternally in hell? Does the Bible say Jesus is God? Does the Bible say the Bible is inspired? Does the Bible say women have to cover up? Lots of different stuff like that. I'm looking at probably right now 16 or 17 chapters on different things. How many missing books of the Bible are there? We have no idea. But you can probably Google online lost books of the Bible, and there will be a lot of different lists, some of them based on where the Bible mentions some text that we just don't have. Like the book of Jasher is mentioned, and we have no idea what that was, where it was, when it might have vanished. And then centuries ago, someone wrote a book of Jasher, and so you can go buy a book of Jasher, but it's from the last few centuries. It's not ancient. Are you familiar with George Bataille's religious theory? I don't think that rings a bell. I take your class on religion, and it was amazing. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. But yeah, I don't recognize that name. Is Myth Vision a good resource for beginners to learn from? Yeah, I think so. I think Derek does a great job. I quibble with things here and there, but for the most part, yeah, I think he does a great job. Hmm. Hang on just a second. Hersag is a homograph of Azubir Saffron. I'd have to look more into that to be able to address that theory. Wayne Wright says, "Good evening, Dan. I found out about you on Bart's blog. My question: what is more accurate than Septuagint that the New Testament quotes for the Masoretic text there our Old Testament is based on?" I don't understand exactly what you're trying to say there. However, the Septuagint was the Hebrew Bible, was the Old Testament for the earliest Christians. In fact, my thesis supervisor when I was at the University of Oxford was Timothy Michael Law, who wrote a wonderful book called When God Spoke Greek, the Septuagint and the Making of the Christian Bible. This talks at length about the influence of the Septuagint on early Christianity and the Christian Bible. The Masoretic text is, if you had to pick just one text, one manuscript, the Masoretic text wins out. However, there are places where the Septuagint contains earlier readings. There are places where the Septuagint contains corrupted earlier readings. Like we know that the Septuagint reflects an earlier reading, but has also altered it. And then the Masoretic text altered it in a different direction or something like that. The Dead Sea Scrolls show us also have earlier readings and some other readings that are probably later. And so you really have to address things on a case by case basis. You can't just say one's better. But if you're talking about just one manuscript, yeah, the Masoretic text is very, very, very good. Like of all of the manuscripts that we have, whoever was responsible for transmitting the Masoretic text probably was the most careful. I watched the video where you responded to The War Within, where he called you a clown, and I'm curious about why you receive a lot of criticism and hate on social media for your scholarly work. It's because scholarship threatens a lot of dogmas, and we develop social identities, and a lot of times we ground our sense of self, our sense of identity, our self-worth, our self-esteem on those identities. And for someone to critique elements of that identity feels like an attack, a personal attack. That's just part of human cognition, and so people are going to intuitively feel an aversion to that kind of thing, and so are usually going to rationalize why the way they feel is right and good, therefore what I'm doing must be wrong, and so are going to lash out. So that's perfectly natural product of human cognition. But yeah, I feel like I kind of have a punchable face though, so there is that too. Dan, what is your opinion the Jewish wedding explanation for the statement of Jesus not knowing the hour? That it's not a great rationalization. It's just an attempt to try to make up traditions as a way to arrogate more significance to texts where we don't understand exactly what's going on, or where they just are not that exciting. And that happens a lot. People, these texts have been around for thousands of years, and so they get boring. And so to inject them with more excitement and significance and to make people excited about them, sometimes you end up making stuff up. Sorry I'm late. Was watching a Paula Friedrichsen lecture. I would find another lecture from Paula. Paula's wonderful. And I'm falling way behind. What is that? 729. Okay, so not. I've been further behind. Could you explain more about religion not really existing? I find this fascinating. Sure. So when we think of religion, we're thinking of a whole conceptual package. There's a whole constellation of ideas associated with religion. And that conceptual package was created between the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. It did not exist prior to that. And an awful example, but just an example of another way to think about what I'm talking about is anciently, people had balls. Anciently, people ran. Anciently, people kicked. But they didn't have soccer because that is a specific configuration of all of those things. And so when we think of religion, we're thinking of a specific configuration of things that we have embedded deep within our understanding of human society and sociality. And that configuration just did not exist in the ancient world. So when we talk about religion, to say, oh, Jesus's religion or Paul's religion or even ancient Zoroastrian religion, we're importing all of that configuration into our thinking about these things. But because that configuration did not exist, that is importing anachronistic ideas and concepts into the ancient world. And so it distorts our understanding of the ancient world. And so I think Smith's The Meaning and End of Religion from, I want to say 64. I could be wrong about that, but the 60s, I think, was the first big kind of shot at the concept of religion as this human universal, this thing that is transhistorical and that is transcultural. And the data just don't support that. And I've got I taught an online class. In fact, the last online class that I taught, December last month, exactly a month ago, was on the concept of religion. So if you go to didascaloi.com, although Kajabi is the platform that we use for Didascaloi, and something is going wrong with Kajabi. We're running into all kinds of issues with our website. And so if you can access the class there, it is for sale there. Was Hezekiah Emmanuel in Isaiah 53? Probably. I mean, there's no better candidate. It's certainly not a prophecy about the future. Emmanuel in Isaiah 53. So Emmanuel is not in Isaiah 53. That's the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. And the suffering servant is probably a personification of Israel. And so that's different. But Hezekiah was Emmanuel in, what is it, Isaiah 7? Pretty sure it's Isaiah 7. Too many numbers. I don't like numbers. My sister is the one who runs math department and now data and analytics for a university. Not me. It is Isaiah 7, right? 14. Yeah, 7:14. Okay, so JC, there you're talking a lot about etymological links between Egyptian and Akkadian and Sumerian and things like that, and that's a little outside my wheelhouse. If Seth Sanders was here, he could speak to those questions, but I am not. I would have to sit down with some text to try to look up what these connections that are being asserted. Um, but yeah, I also don't know the relationship to something like El Shaddai. So give me an opportunity to go look some of that stuff up, if you don't mind. How many Jesuses are there? There were a lot of Jesuses anciently. That was a very common name. Jesus and Barabbas as the same person. That is a very ancient. There's I think Matthew. There are manuscripts that have Barabbas's name as Jesus Barabbas, and this is basically a literary rhetorical flourish. Choose the right Jesus kind of thing, and they chose the wrong Jesus. So yeah, the notion that there were Barabbas was not even a historical name. So the notion that that was that was Jesus is doesn't have any data to support it. And this is something that I see a lot in attempts to try to explain or understand better the text. There's a presumption of historicity when you're thinking about like, oh well, if they were doing this, then the woman taken in adultery, where's the guy? Well, the guy never existed because the story is made up. So the author was telling the story to get a point across, and so it's a MacGuffin. It's like what's in the suitcase in Pulp Fiction. It's a MacGuffin. Nothing. So this is the case with trying to understand a lot of the texts of the Bible. Well, wouldn't Goliath have been holding a shield that would have been this high, and this is the fighting conventions and techniques they would have used? No, none of that matters because it's a story. And the authors are telling the story to get a point across, and the details that would have existed had it been historical are not relevant to understanding the story. Has Christian views on what lessons the story of Noah and the flood teaches changed significantly over the history of the church? Yeah, absolutely. There have been, like I said, people have to try to generate new significance and new meaning for texts that have been around for so long, and so over the years there have been all kinds of different ways to try to make sense of that, and there have been kind of general trends that have held for a long time, and we are the inheritors of, most of it accumulates. Some things go, are lost by the wayside because they're really dumb or don't serve anybody's interests anymore, but for the most part we have the accumulation of all that to choose from. When the writers of the synoptics sat down to compose their work, what materials did they have in front of them? That's a great question. Some people, a lot of scholars reconstruct a hypothetical Q source for Quella, source, um, which would have been a sayings gospel. And we have examples of sayings gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, which may preserve some sayings that predate the synoptic gospels. If they had anything else in front of them, we don't know. Probably some oral traditions, probably fragments of stories and traditions that had been in circulation, but we don't know for sure. Hi, Dan. Does Leviticus 18:22 refer to incest? No. This refers to male same-sex intercourse, and the idea here in Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13. So in Leviticus 18, we have we have a bunch of thou shalt nots, and this is associated with sexual purity. And in 20, we're repeating those, but we're also adding penalties. And I think most scholars would say whoever is responsible for the form of Leviticus 20, the way it has come down to us, was not the same author who's responsible for Leviticus 18 as it came down to us. Because 18 doesn't have any penalties, and most of the legislation doesn't really have any penalties. And Leviticus 20 is, everything's death, straight to execution for both parties, irrespective of consent. Because the idea here is that doing these things generates a metaphysical impurity that pollutes the land. And there's only so much that the land can bear without that contamination being purged before the land will vomit you out. And so killing everybody is basically how you purge the evil, the wickedness, the contamination from the land. And this is also about the social hierarchy of domination. Anciently, sex was not a mutual act engaged in by two equal partners. It was an act that an active sexual agent, who was a man, did to a passive sexual object, who was anybody else. And so the problem with male same-sex intercourse, specifically anal, is that that there was a man who was supposed to be at the top of this hierarchy, who was being put in a submissive, subordinate, receptive position and role, and that violated that social hierarchy. And there are also concepts of ideas about loss of semen and reproduction and things like that. But basically, the idea is this is a no-no, and they don't care about female same-sex intercourse because this was all about the sexual agent. There's only one law in those two chapters, and in all the sexual legislation of the Hebrew Bible, that prohibits a woman from engaging in a specific sexual act. And that is a prohibition on women engaging in intercourse with animals, because that would have been the only agent who sat below a woman on that hierarchy of domination. And so the sexual ethic is so alien to how we think about things today, and their understanding of why, their understanding of what the big deal is, their reasoning, their rationale is all just totally alien to us today and phenomenally outdated. And so people who think we can just that this law just transfers wholesale to today without comment don't know what they're talking about. It's totally irrelevant to today, has absolutely no relevance, because it's based on phenomenally outdated and inaccurate concepts of human sexuality and metaphysics. Does the Bible say if God created evil? Isaiah 45:7 could be interpreted that way. A lot of people will point out that if they wanted ra there to mean evil as we understand it, they would have had the other side of that equation be tov, and it's shalom, it's peace. And so some people think, well, the antithesis to peace is calamity, and so it should be understood to be saying, I make peace and I create calamity. At the same time, this is probably coming from around the Persian period, where they're probably interacting with some Zoroastrian ideas about dualism. And so you've got Ahura Mazda, you've got Angra Mainyu, you've got good deities and bad deities. And so this could be responding to that, saying, no, Adonai is responsible for everything, the good and the bad. And so if that's the case, then I think it's a lot closer to the idea that, yes, God creates evil. But the problem of evil is is one that is not so easily shooed away by the traditional approach. Hand of Omega, thank you so much for the question. What process did books go through after being written? Were there agents, publishers, rooms of scribes working in shifts, a postal service delivering to bookstores? Who paid for all this? So that's a phenomenal question, and we don't know a ton about it, but there are a number of places, a number of texts that you can go look to. And give me just a second to pull some up. Now, for the Hebrew Bible, There are a number of books that have been written on this about the scribal culture and literary culture. Um, hang on. I know he did a. I'm just pulling up some books to see if they're relevant. There it is. Okay, that is one. Um, okay, so let's share a screen here. So, in terms of scribal culture, David Carr's writing on the tablet of the heart goes into a bit of detail, comparing with Greco-Roman and Mesopotamian scribal culture, how things get written, who is writing them, that kind of thing. Bill Schneidevand published "How the Bible Became a Book," which is doing very similar things. He also published "The Finger of the Scribe: How Scribes Learned to Write the Bible," which is a little more about scribal culture. And Robin Walsh, The Origins of Early Christian Literature, Contextualizing the New Testament Within Greco-Roman Literary Culture, talks about how the texts of the New Testament were probably produced. It's important to note that these things were written by elites, and primarily for elites. They were not widely shared. You did not have a ton of literary people. And to the degree that they were exposed to literature, it was usually because they heard it being read or performed or something like that. Now, Candida Moss has a wonderful book that will be coming out soon called God's Ghostwriters, which is about the role that enslaved peoples played in producing, writing, and transmitting the text of the New Testament. I do not have a copy of that yet. I understand that one is on the way, so I will have more details on that later. But it was a very different culture, and yeah, it was primarily the elites who were doing it. And this is one of the reasons that things like the laws in Deuteronomy and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers were probably not widely known and certainly weren't widely enforced. They were being written for the literati as propaganda for the most part. And people will say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why is it in the Bible if it's propaganda? Why do we have the 10 Commandments posted outside of courtrooms in the United States when they are not enforced, and they have no legal force, for propaganda's sake? All right, let me close some of this down, get a little more organized. Okay, Eunice and Cleon, thank you for the question. What do you think of Mar Saba letter / Morton Smith? Phew, I tend to be a little more skeptical about this kind of stuff. So I tend to side with those scholars who see these things as problematic, as probably forged. I think we're on safer ground to treat them that way than to risk uh, advancing scholarship based on forgeries. So yeah, I would side with the presumption of non-authenticity. Are there any good resources on the compilation of the Septuagint? There are a lot of good introductions to the Septuagint that are going to talk about how it came together. There are, technical academic monographs and edited volumes that go into a lot more detail, but I don't think you really want to go down that road. But there are some good introductions to the Septuagint. Let me just pull some up. Some of these are a little outdated. And I'll throw some of the more technical things in here as well. Just just so you can see them. Not the incredibly technical, but things that might be a little less accessible. I thought I had another. And yeah, one of the more technical ones is Annalee Amaleus's book on the trail of the Septuagint translators. So let me share here. I actually used this in my Oxford master's thesis quite a bit, and I've spoken with Annalee since then a couple of different times. But this is a pretty technical discussion. T&T Clark Companion to the Septuagint is going to be an edited volume that's going to have a lot of different stuff on, introduction. What is this all about? The Septuagint, and then we got papers on all the different texts of the Septuagint. So that's going to be interesting as well. The Septuagint in Context, Introduction to the Greek Version of the Bible is good. The Oxford Handbook of the Septuagint. These were both at one point or another my supervisors while I was at Oxford. I started off under Alison Salveson, and halfway through, her load did not allow for her to supervise my work, so I went and everything else was supervised by Timothy Michael Law. And the T&T Clark Handbook of Septuagint Research is going to be a little more technical, and then Jennifer Dine's The Septuagint, I think, is a more accessible intro to the Septuagint. Vandertorn concludes, by the 14th century BC, before the call of Adonai had reached Israel, groups of Edomites and Midianites worshipped Adonai as their god. This is the Kenite Midianite hypothesis. Vandertorn talks about that back in the 90s. And then Robert Miller II argued for it in his recent book. And Robert, I understand, tragically passed away within the last couple of weeks. But he wrote Adonai, Origins of a Desert God, basically reinforcing the Kenite Midianite hypothesis. We don't really have the data to say that any of that for sure. That's a reconstruction. It's one possible reconstruction. Another is that provided by Daniel Fleming in Adonai, Glimpses of History in a Divine Name. Jason, When God Spoke Greek is a fantastic book. If you don't have it, add to cart. I agree very much. We got some more. JC, is the Vesica Pisces, as on the Magdala stone and Phoenician bowls, associated with the signs on the Jonah ossuary and the ichthys? I've said this before. I think these are geometric shapes that are imbued with all kinds of different significance when they're being used in different ways for different reasons by different peoples in different contexts. And so I don't think we can identify a thread of meaning tying them all together. It's certainly possible that people viewing them could have seen these things in them, but at the same time, it's possible that the people responsible for producing them had no intention of linking them iconographically or semantically with other things. It's just the nature of art that people will find the meaning in it that they do, whether or not the artist intended for it to be there. And that's one of the complex aspects of trying to interpret these things. Jesus was a Judean. The area was not renamed to Palestina until 135 by Emperor Hadrian. I would say Jesus was a Galilean. Most critical scholars would say Jesus was almost certainly born in Nazareth, and that the linking of his birth to Bethlehem was a later tradition that was intended to satisfy concerns for prophecy. Palestine is a name that goes back to Herodotus. It developed from the name Philistines, and it is used for definitely the coast of this area, and there is debate about whether or not it was used to refer to like Jerusalem and the areas of Judea. There are scholars who will argue that when you look at the way it's used in some of these Greek authors, they're clearly referring to the coast and not to Judea, and they use the word Judea elsewhere to refer to the land around Jerusalem. Others will say there are authors who use it to refer broadly to that whole area. So I don't think either case is a strong one. I don't think we can say for sure. But we also use the word Palestinian in more ethnic ways today. And as far as an ethnic Palestinian, I think that argument is a much harder one to make. However, both Jewish folks and Palestinian folks have genetic roots that go all the way back to the Bronze Age in that region. So the notion that anyone has a clear claim to genetic priority is not supported at all by the data. Can you discuss Numbers 31:18? Sure can. This is about the virgin women being taken as basically as sex slaves. There are folks who will say, well, they're. In fact, you know what? Instead of going into a ton of detail here, I did a YouTube live with Josh Bowen, with Kip Davis, and then I don't remember if anyone else was involved in the one where we discussed this, but we discussed Numbers 31 at length, and the apologetic attempts to make this about something other than what it very clearly is, which is kill everybody except for the virgin girls and keep them for yourselves as concubines, basically. But thank you for the question. R369B, thank you so much for the question. Do you have times with the LDS Church interpretations of books where you're like, come on, most of the time? Almost all the time. I bite my tongue an awful lot in Sunday school. I used to do so less, but it stressed my wife out. Oh, I need a drink. You find you're more forgiving with your personal faith. Ask Utah state legislators if I am a forgiving person when it comes to my faith. Is it hard to shut off the more scientific aspect of what you do? No, but yeah, I think we're getting outside the bounds of what I normally do, or what I allow myself to do on my social media discussion. But yeah, there are some times when I'll be more forgiving. There are other times when I am harsher. Oh, sorry about the typos earlier, but it was supposed to read, what is more accurate, the Septuagint that the New Testament is quoting or the Masoretic text that the Old Testament? I would say when it comes to the quotes that are in the New Testament, the Masoretic text is more accurate. Yeah, pretty much every time. I can't think of off the top of my head of an example of a quotation of a Hebrew Bible passage in the New Testament that is more accurate than a differing Masoretic reading. All right, I've got about 10 more minutes before I've got to go get some kiddos ready for bed. DKC 1002, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate all you have done on the internet, Dan. I really hope your efforts will help create a more intellectual, honest, and loving Christianity. I am hopeful of the same. I appreciate that very much. It is a tall order. It is quite a pipe dream, but I hear from people every single day who say that it has helped them immensely and that it has helped them understand better their upbringing, their childhood, their parents. That it makes them feel better about having left Christianity, about being an atheist, about having stayed in Christianity. So I have been phenomenally touched by hearing from folks who say that I have helped them in some way. And I'm very glad to hear that. And for that reason, I will continue to do this for as long as I can speak and for as long as I can stand to see myself on a screen. which will probably be the first thing to go. A bit of a loaded question. Do you have a favorite apologist? Not really. Um, Justin Martyr, but I have issues with Justin too. Is there a lost book you'd most like to see recovered? Um, I can't think of one off the top of my head. There are like sources or original versions of text I would love to see recovered. And sometimes it's just the fragment of a Dead Sea Scroll that we is just was just off the page or something like that. Oh, and somebody said I'm glad YouTube got rid of those I want to talk to you bots. For whatever reason, there is somebody on TikTok who is adamant about creating fake McClellan accounts and then telling people, like responding to people's comments, like "Thank you so much. Come talk with me on Telegram," and then they try to hit them up for money. I only have my one account on each social media channel, and that's the only account I will ever have. So if you see somebody responding about coming over to Telegram or something like that, that is not me. And I have tried everything I can on TikTok to try to get rid of that, and nothing is working. The most I can do is block those folks. So I apologize for that. I've got over 60 of those fake accounts on TikTok, and they're driving me crazy. And like within the last 2 days, I've had to block like 6 or 7 accounts. They keep making them. It's like McClellan underscore, I block them. McClellan 1, I block them. McClellan 2. It's been going on like that for the last 2 days. And I cannot imagine they are actually making any, like, I can't imagine they're benefiting from this at this point. They're probably just ticked at me. All right, I'm skipping down a little bit so I can try to get to some of the more recent questions. Hi Dan, how was grad school for you? I'm a bit worried going into it. Like I said earlier in the live stream, I had a very unconventional graduate experience. I had a wonderful time at the University of Oxford. I had a wonderful time at Trinity Western University. I had a wonderful time at Exeter, but I'd never even saw the Exeter campus until 2 years after I got my degree. Though it was a remote distance PhD. But I had a great time at the time Skyping with Francesca every couple of weeks. In between my degrees was awful because I was never sure if I was going to be continuing in graduate school. I was, struggling to keep advancing the football. So it was a struggle. But when I was actually in school, I loved every minute of it. What account responds most to your videos on TikTok? I think this what's I don't remember his first name, Bach. Uh who he has like a master's degree in theology and is an apologist and is like, you need to read this commentary from 1897 because critical scholarship is wrong. uh that guy, I think, found out that he gets attention by responding to my videos, particularly if I respond back to him, and so he's published like a dozen videos responding to me in the last couple of weeks. So that guy. Philip North, thank you for the question. Hey, Dan, does most of the pushback you encounter come from politically and theologically conservative confessions? Yes. Your arguments don't, well, no, that's not true. Once I start talking about how Christmas and Easter are not pagan holidays, the pushback I get from atheists is a lot more pejorative and a lot more belligerent. So and a lot more like there's a lot more of it. However, I don't respond to those videos as much as I respond to conservative things. But yeah, particularly on Twitter and things like that. If somebody's like, "Oh, you're biased, you're theologically wrong," I know what I'm going to see if I go look at their account. I know who they're going to vote for in the upcoming election. It's always the same. Your arguments don't really present any problem for an Episcopalian, for example. Yeah, because Episcopalians take the scholarship a lot more seriously. And there was a creator on TikTok. I apologize, I don't remember his name. He's French Canadian. He made a video where he was like, Dan's videos are like, there's nothing in the videos that you wouldn't be exposed to in a competent intro to biblical studies class. He's like, it's not innovative, it's not groundbreaking. He's just sharing what biblical scholarship has been saying for years and years and years, and what anyone who takes these classes at a decent university will hear. And so it was kind of like, intuitively, I was kind of like, ouch. But at the same time, I was like, well, yeah, I'm not. There are a couple of things where I'm sharing like my published research where it is a little more on the vanguard. But for the most part, all I do is share the consensus view. And sometimes I don't agree with the consensus view. And usually that consensus view has been around for generations. So I found that video funny because the guy was like, I'm not being critical, but I'm just saying none of this is special. This is all run of the mill biblical scholarship. And he was being complimentary. He was saying, relax. He's just representing the scholarly consensus. So yeah, for some religious traditions who have already made their peace with that, yeah, it's not going to be an issue. Okay, 4 more minutes. I'll extend it for 4 more minutes. Chorizo, spelled with an S, and I don't think it's spelled with a U. It's normally spelled with an O. Anyway, thank you for the question. Is Judas Iscariot a literary device meant to represent the Jews? His name, role, and then future artistic representation always seem problematic to me. No, at least not. No, no. Probably the most anti-Semitic of the Gospels is John, which certainly represents Judas as having the devil, possessing him. But I don't know that he's a figure for Jewish folks. Now, in Mark, Judas, interestingly enough, doesn't seem to be represented as a villain. A lot of scholars would say Judas is represented as somebody who was trying to spark the confrontation that would result in deliverance and the apocalypse and everything. And then it didn't work out that way, and he was mortified. It's not until Matthew and Luke and then John that you get this representation of Judas as inspired by the devil or as evil or as doing things wrong. Because the simple statement that Judas handed Jesus over doesn't really have a moral judgment associated with it. It doesn't have a negative connotation. It just means to hand over. And that's really all you get in Mark about Judas, is that Judas handed him over. So there's a theory that Judas was just a wrong place, wrong time kind of situation, at least in Mark, and then gets picked up as a villain in the other Gospels. John C. Newman, sorry I'm broke. Does anything online actually make you mad or angry? Everything that the Utah State Legislature does makes me furious. You always sound so chill and level-headed in your response videos. On Twitter, I can be a lot less chill and level-headed. It's hard to imagine what would tick you off. Bullies, legislative bullies, other kinds of bullies. Yeah. Turns out when one's only motive for repeating stuff is this dunks on a group I hate, people pointing out how it's not factual ruffles feathers. Isn't that funny? Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I was kind of surprised by how much my content resonated with some folks, because I was kind of posturing as somebody just calling balls and strikes who wasn't playing for either team or any of the teams. And so sometimes I would say things in support of one side and sometimes another and sometimes a third side. And so I figured that was going to be, it was going to be difficult for people to be like, I like the cut of his jib. But I was surprised by that. And I was, I've made videos where I'm like, hey, I support this creator's rhetorical goals, but I have to disagree with that. And sometimes I did not feel great about doing those videos because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings or attract negative attention to somebody's account or something like that. And so, yeah, one of the things that I always try to emphasize is that if you're reducing everything to what it means to your group, the in group or the out group, then you're not going to be right very frequently. Which is why I try to. That's one of the main things I mean when I say data over dogma. Is I want to set aside the identities. I want to set aside the in-group, out-group dynamics. I want to set all that aside and just focus on the data, because it's when the implications are in play and when the social identities are in play that we tend to subordinate the data and we tend to make wrong decisions. Have you ever talked about the claim that Jesus' life is one of the most documented lives in the ancient world? A laughable claim. It would be about as true as saying a specific, if there was a specific $100 bill with a specific serial number that had been counterfeited more than any other, it would be like saying that was the most documented $100 bill ever. And that's not to say that everything is counterfeit, but it's to say that the fact that you had reproductions of these accounts for 1,500 years. And so you can say, look at all of the copies we have, does not mean that that original account is any more or less true. Like, most documented in terms of accumulations of copies is 100% meaningless when it comes to the veracity or falsity of that original document. So that is absolutely meaningless. When it comes to independent attestation, when it comes to multiple attestation, when it comes to numbers of witnesses or first or second or third hand accounts, there are numerous other people who are far better documented. So I think that claim is laughable. Okay, I've gone over time. I've got to go get some kiddos and some doggos to bed. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. I apologize that I could not get to everyone. I see I've missed a lot of questions. I've got to find a way to get better at keeping up. But I feel like people appreciate the comprehensiveness of my responses when I'm able to when I'm able to respond in more detail. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the super chats. Did I miss any? I think I have responded to all the super chats. So thank you so much. I don't think there were any other comments in the, not on the server. So you're aware, my what's it called? My Patreon I do live streams every month on my Patreon, and one of them is for the people, the highest subscriber level, and they have a dedicated live stream channel on Discord. And so for any of my live streams, I have that Discord open, and so anybody who posts questions on there automatically will get immediate priority. But not a lot of people take advantage of that that live stream channel on that Discord that you can get access to if you join my Patreon. So thank you so much, everybody. I need to go get a drink and then get some kids ready for bed. And I got to work in the morning, and I get up pretty early. So I will see y'all later. I hope you all have a wonderful night, that you've had a wonderful weekend, and that you all have a wonderful week. Bye, everybody.